great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great.
And I want to begin our journey into your life by asking you, this whole pandemic thing really threw lots of things at us all at once. How did you ultimately make it through that 4-year window? And how did it change the way that you live your life now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a natural introvert. So I think for some introverts, we were kind of like, well, this is how we were living basically before the pandemic. So we're okay. You're telling me I've got an excuse to get out of every social event? Like, all right. But more seriously, like I was still teaching at that time. And for teachers, it was really, really stressful. In part because we're bouncing between remote instruction, hybrid instruction, in-person instruction, trying to get, teenagers to wear a mask. It was just hard. I think it created or sort of unearthed a lot of the sort of the gaps between the kids who have a lot of resources and come from a certain type of family and those who don't. Certainly if you're teaching kids and you're asking them to come on remotely, there is a kind of inequity between kids who have really good Wi-Fi and have laptops and can jump on and those who don't, right? And I think, the last piece of it, it really is that there is still sort of this post-pandemic sense of unease among teachers that has carried forward and a bit of sort of change fatigue. And now that they're being asked to not only be teachers, but to be experts in AI and to do conflict resolution and teach kids social emotional skills that they wouldn't have or that they've lost through the pandemic. We've never asked teachers for more than we're asking right now, which is why you're seeing so many people drop out of the profession. So the kind of lingering effect, I think, has just been just exhaustion, right?
So let me ask you this. We had kind of touched a little bit before we got on about your history in education and in music, but I want to
Mm.
get to the brass tacks of what you do now in 2024. I'm going to put you
Sure.
in front of a bunch of third graders, your native world, so to speak. It's
Yeah.
career day, and one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Yeah. So I actually I've never taught elementary. I've only ever taught high school.
Okay.
There's a funny quote in teaching. They say you teach the age you are, which makes me about 17 years old in terms of maturity. So that's about right. But yeah, so I am the president of a consulting group. It's called Pathos Consulting Group. And we build AI and automation systems mostly for the school staff. So that's a tough pitch for a third grader, but maybe more understandable for your audience.
Yeah.
Basically, what we found was in going into schools and training teachers on AI and helping them sort of prepare for the kind of exponential change they're facing, that this wasn't really a tech problem for schools. It's much more like an organizational development problem. It's a problem of emotions and attitudes. It's an extremely emotionally charged issue. And when you're trying to lead an organization through change, it really, really helps to have narratives of success stories that you can spread in that organization that kind of get people thinking that maybe the change isn't so bad or that maybe the plan forward is actually something worth being optimistic about. So that's when we kind of discovered that the low hanging fruit in schools when it comes to AI and automation is really on the staff side of schools. Teachers are overwhelmed, they have limited bandwidth, there's only so much sort of time and attention they can give to learning new stuff. Kids are super vulnerable. Giving them this technology is fraught with all kinds of ethics and safety risks. So there, almost everyone in this space is focusing on AI and automation for the classroom, but the people who are inundated by repetitive labor and actually where the low hanging fruit is, like I said, is much more on the staff side of school. And so we try to leverage those success stories on the staff side to get teachers and students and leadership thinking a little bit differently about what tech can do. So that's the pitch. That's what we do.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
That totally makes sense to me. And
yeah.
I'm an IT guy in a school
Hmm.
district by day, so I get
Oh,
it.
dude, you
Yeah,
really get it.
I'm
Yeah.
in the soup for sure.
Okay.
So let me ask you this. What did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
Oh man, I might have said something like President of the United States. I might have given you like a big answer.
Yeah.
I thought politician that might have been up there. My dad was a foreign service officer, so like a diplomat, meaning I grew up moving every like 2 years of my life in South America and Europe, moving all over the world. It's a little bit like an army brat kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think that just at an early age, I saw my dad um, as sort of like one of the good guys. I was kind of a good government, um, American exceptionalism was like part of the household. Also, just like in the early to mid 90s, there was a lot of reason to feel really optimistic about America's place in the world. And I think watching my dad and the work that he did just gave me this sense that like politics wasn't a dirty word and that doing something like that would have actually been quite noble.
So you ultimately got into music. Talk to me a little bit about this music journey. And even
Yeah.
early on in your life, where you were born and raised and how these seeds of education and leadership and arts and music, how did all of this kind of become the tsunami that has evolved into who you are?
Yeah. So um I got really, really into music, I think in like 2007, 2008. So I would have been senior in high school, freshman in college. And around that time, there was just this explosion in what was called like electro or electro house music. There was this EDM explosion. I had never heard anything like it before. I don't think I'd ever heard like a sawtooth synth before in my life. And I was like, it was one of those moments where you just think, I've got to be part of this. Whatever this is, I want to be with those guys that are doing it. And at that time, I was a freshman at Vanderbilt, which is a great place to start because you can be a big fish in a small pond in a place like Nashville. And so I started a music blog, kind of dating myself with that. But pretty quickly got about like 50,000 unique visitors a month to that site. There were only a couple of DJs on campus, so I picked that up really quickly. And then started throwing my own concerts, throwing my own shows, promoting at venues downtown. Found that I could really easily get like 1,000 kids from frats and sororities to come to my events. And then I noticed that promoters can sometimes lose money and they don't necessarily always make money, but that agents always make their 10, 15%. So I went to work for this guy, Hunter Williams, who's now at CAA. And at that time was working with his dad, Buck Williams, and they were managing like Widespread Panic, REM. He had this really big EDM artist called Pretty Lights. And Hunter was like a 29-year-old who was a millionaire. And if you're, 21 years old and your boss is a millionaire and he's in his late 20s and he's driving this cool car, I just thought, oh my gosh, like this is the coolest thing ever. But then pretty quickly discovered that agents, and this is not to disparage them, but they're middlemen, right? They're not that close to the fun part of music.
Yeah,
And they're on the phone yelling and screaming. It's just a tough job.
yeah.
Um, and so that's what got me into tour management, managing artists. I loved that because I was so close to the creativity, close to the artists. Went out to Los Angeles and did that for years. And loved that, loved LA a little less, found that like a little bit soul sucking. And basically, the transition into education was that I had these very strange days where I'd literally go from like working with a narcissistic rapper in a studio over at Paramount to like tutoring a first grader in the hills because I needed the extra cash at the time, and thinking to myself, this first part of my day that's supposed to be really glamorous is just awful. But this second part of my day where I'm actually working with a kid and watching him improve and watching him learn is like the only good thing in my day.
Yeah,
I wish my life felt more like the second half of the day.
yeah.
And so I made that transition, got out of LA, started teaching, and the rest is history.
So, who's been a hero for you? Who's been an inspiration for you in all of these pursuits that have collectively led to your career?
I'd probably have to say my mom. She's got a very different personality. Like I said, I'm pretty introverted. She is the exact opposite of that. Will literally chat up anybody, but she's a teacher. She's the daughter of a teacher. My mom used to like sub our class when I was in elementary school, and I was always so proud of her. It wasn't like a source of embarrassment. Like it was cool when my mom subbed our class because all the kids loved her, and I was so proud of her. Um, so yeah, I think just giving me permission to create a life, and I include my dad in this too, and I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but like to create a life that's devoted to serving other people and to try to do something that was meaningful and of value for others and actually was solving real problems and had kind of a heart to it. um that's at the heart of what even I'm doing now with this consultancy. People are surprised because they tend to think like, oh, automation, you're stealing jobs or you're making schools less human. It's actually the opposite. When you automate away the repetitive drudgery of someone's job, the stuff they now have time for is the stuff only humans can do. So it's actually kind of counterintuitive, but I definitely say my mom and dad.
So, if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would it be? Who'd you love to meet and talk to?
Mm. Um, I this might be kind of an odd answer. I'd probably pick Conan O'Brien. I'm just like I'm a comedy nerd. I love Conan so much.
Yeah.
I've been a huge fan of his, watching his late night shows since I was in probably high school. Um, I just think he is like superhuman funny. How about you? Do you have an answer for
Oh,
that question?
Conan would definitely be on my list. I love
Oh,
him.
nice.
I had a dog that I just lost in
Mm.
November, and I named her after Conan because he was getting ready to go to Tonight Show. I was so excited. We just got
Yeah.
her, and she was the best dog, the absolute best incarnation of a soul on this planet that I've ever been around was named
Wow.
Coco.
Yeah.
But yeah, Conan, I love Barack Obama. I think his
Mm.
spirit, I think what he does and how he is in general is just so exemplary as a person.
Yeah.
Um, I did actually meet my hero though last September,
Okay.
Dwight Gooden, the pitcher for the Mets.
Okay.
I loved him when I was growing up. I had his posters, I had everything. He was the guy. He came to Kansas City to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum for an
Yeah.
event, and I got press credentials and went in and met him and interviewed him, and he was the coolest guy. So when they say
Oh,
don't meet your heroes,
yeah.
it might be okay.
Yeah, there. Well, so that's part of maybe the appeal of someone like Conan is you know that there's not like some other Conan, some secret Conan who's like a jerk and would brush you off. Like he's kind of famous for being willing to like talk to his fans and take a photo. Like he's very kind of what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Obama's a good choice too. I was just rewatching in part because the country's been so crazy the last couple, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe for 8 years, but certainly for the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
But I was just rewatching his Berlin speech in '08. I don't know if you remember
Uh-huh.
that when he went to
Uh-huh.
Berlin and millions of people showed up. And he starts that speech by saying, I'm not coming to you as a politician, but as a citizen of the world.
Yep.
And it gets this huge applause. And you put that in the context of 2008, people like had really soured on the United States over those Bush years through the Iraq War, and for a candidate to come out and say like, I'm a citizen of the world was almost kind of a revolutionary thing for an American to
Absolutely.
say at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, his oratory is just
Oh,
insane.
doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah,
So in the school district that I work in the Kansas City area, it's Grandview. There was a
yeah.
graduate in 1975 by the name of Mark Pender, and he was the
Mhm.
trumpet player in the Conan band.
Oh
And
wow. Oh,
I've
I
got
so he's is he the bald guy?
yeah, and he always throws the horn up in
Yes.
the air.
Yeah. He's got
So
glasses. I know him. Yeah.
yeah, so he graduated from Grandview High School in 1975. I interviewed him, and it was right around the time I think that Conan went to TBS.
Hmm.
And he's just the coolest cat in the world. Still very into the jazz world, still loves Kansas City, has a lot of ties, but he was the perfect guy to be in the Conan band. And he
Yeah.
was just glowing about how well Conan treated the band. And a lot of those guys did that. Letterman always wanted Paul with him. All
Yeah.
those guys have an allegiance to the musical core that made them who they are.
Yeah, well, there's a kind of and a lot of comedians have talked about this, but there's a bit of an overlap between comedy and music. There's rhythm, there's silence, there's timing. Like you hear it, especially I think like sort of a lot of sort of Jewish comedians from like the 20th century, even Yiddish as like a language has a kind of a music that like you don't even have to know what the word means for it to just sound funny.
Yeah.
But like you think about like someone like a Don Rickles or something, like there's
Oh man.
music in that, right? So like I think there's always been this affinity and connection between comedy and jazz. Uh,
Absolutely. That's so
yeah,
well said. You're so right, man. It is.
yeah,
There's a meter that goes into how those work that riff the same. That's interesting.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
what is it for you every day that gets you up to do the work that you do? I mean, you obviously are you're dealing with AI, you're dealing with empowering people, you're an entrepreneur. There's a lot that goes into it. What gets you up every day? What motivates you not only to do a good job, but you have
yeah.
to hold enough back to evolve as a human yourself. What is that gas in your tank?
Yeah. So we do a lot of discovery calls with staff members from schools. And very often they don't know what can be automated and what can't be. So that conversation just kind of sounds like, tell us what the repetitive drudgery is that you're doing every month, right? Like, what's the stuff that's repetitive, mundane, time consuming, involves moving information from one place to another? What do you wish you could just get off your plate? And they'll start describing their process to me and to my team of developers. and my developers will start asking them questions, start fleshing out the process. And within seconds, I'm watching this team come up with an automation for this system. And we can typically take it from something that's 10 hours to 2 hours in a month, right? We're usually cutting about 80% of the time. Not 100% because there's always kind of has to be a human in the loop, but we're taking tons of the drudgery out. And so the answer to your question really is watching that moment of recognition from this staff member going, oh my gosh, you literally just freed me from the part of my job that I dread. And everyone has an answer to this question. We did a system for an athletic director in Charlotte, and she spent 3 hours every Friday just emailing all of the coaches and all of the schools and all of the refs that they were going to play the following week with the schedules and just confirming things and locations and times. 3 hours every Friday, just sending dozens of emails. She hated it. She hated it so much that she said people knew not to even knock on my door on Friday mornings because I was going to be a bad mood every Friday morning. But we looked at that process, looked at the spreadsheets she had, created an AI step for it. Now her process is to look in her draft folder. Those emails are already written for her, and her job is just to double check them before they go out. And she just
Wow.
presses send. 3 hour process to a 20-minute process. And
Wow.
she said, now with those 3 hours every Friday, I'm walking around, I'm chatting with people, I'm smiling. Like I am a different person every Friday. And so that's kind of what I was getting to before, is that people have this misconception when they hear what we do that it must be this very cold technical thing that pushes away the humanity. And I just say to them, like, let me tell you stories, because it is the opposite of that. And it's super, super cool to take the worst part of someone's week and get rid of it for them.
That's the thing that I think about technology that can be the most dangerous is ignorance. And I don't see that in a negative
Mm,
way. You just don't know what
yeah.
you can do to streamline processes. And we live in an era
Yeah.
right now with AI where you can do that. You just have to know how to
Yeah.
do it and then implement it and get there.
Yeah.
So I got to know before we depart the spaceship
Sure.
of music that we've talked about. What was the
Yeah.
first concert you went to that blew your mind?
Oh, I've definitely got an answer to this. Okay. Los Angeles, summer of 2008. I saw a bunch of groups that most people have never heard of, but it blew my mind. So it was a DJ duo called Mastercraft, another one called Bloody Beetroots. NERD was there. So that's Pharrell's old outfit.
Yeah.
I think Steve Aoki might have been there, but it was that, like, I want to be part of this thing. There was this kind of barricade and you could see people milling about backstage. And I just thought, how do you become one of those people? I want to be back there and know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I just thought I will do anything to be back there. Once I
Yeah.
actually got back there, I was like, ah, it's all right. It's not
Yeah,
that great.
right. But
But
you
but for at that moment, I had to be back there.
But you had to know, and who would, I mean, maybe it would have been the best gig in the world, but you had enough gumption and grit to be like, you know what?
Yeah.
That's the dude I want to be. So
Yeah, yeah.
good
How
for
about you?
you.
You must have a moment that jazz just like lit up your brain. What was that?
Man, I was flying to Seattle and a friend of mine gave me Kind of Blue, and I had an old
Mm,
CD player. This was
yeah.
95, which is going to date me. But I
Hmm.
remember hearing the first notes. And then
Hmm.
after that, my roommate, when I had moved out, had a whole bunch of vinyl and a bunch of CDs, all of it bebop, the glory days, the honey dripping 50s, 60s vibe.
Hmm.
And I just got into it. And I was in broadcasting. I did sports broadcasting. And just
Okay.
like you, I wanted to
Yeah.
do it so bad. I wanted to be on the set of Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN. But when I got on the inside, I was like, I don't think so. So I got
Yeah.
out and I heard this show called the Neon Beat. It was the American Songbook. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh my God. I reached out to the guy. I was doing part-time journalism. I interviewed him. He said, come over to my house, write a script because he knew my
Hmm.
history. I wrote a jazz script in 2011. He happened to live 5 blocks away from me. He was an engineer by day and had all of this old equipment in his house. And that was
Hmm.
it. That started it. So it's
Hmm.
all about scratching the surface, but you sometimes you got to dig to find your dream.
Yeah. It's funny that you say kind of blue, because I've when I used to grade when I was teaching, that was the record that I would grade to, because it's great. You can sort of tune in this beautiful way. You can
Yeah.
concentrate on something else really intently without kind of focusing on it. But those opening notes too, which I think are probably that kind of like dun dun
Yeah.
dun dun, right? It's so iconic.
Man.
Like it's one of those records where I think it might be the best selling jazz record of all time, or
Yeah.
it's certainly like in the top three.
Yeah.
But it deserves it. It's
Absolutely.
so great.
Yeah.
Like Bill Evans, like Miles Davis, like it's just it's perfect. And I think what I love about jazz, I don't know if you ever listened to like Jacob Collier,
Oh yeah,
or like
Jacob's
some of the
great.
sort of new like I just love the colors, man. Like I
Totally.
just love how unexpected. I love the sort of the multimodal, like just unexpected, insane stuff that only happens in jazz. And I'm very happy just with like a 2-5-1, like simple stuff too.
Yeah,
But I love the completely unexpected. I have no idea what just happened there.
that's
Oh
it.
my God, what was that stuff that only happens in jazz? It only happens in jazz.
But that's Conan comedy too. You don't know what he's going to do.
Mhm.
He did insane
Yeah.
stuff. Like when we brought out
Yeah.
the comedy dog thing, and he did
Mhm.
that, and he would get those weird characters that would come out in the crowd throwing peppermints at people, like the big cigarette butt guy that came out. It's like
Yeah.
they were doing crazy stuff. No one was thinking. I
Yeah.
mean, Letterman kind of started the lunacy, but
Mhm.
Conan took it to a whole different level. But it's that kind of a thing. But that's what I try to do with my show, is to show where jazz came from and where it's at now. I want to celebrate today, like you said. There's so
Yeah.
many cats that are nailing things in a very evolved way, putting a lot of electronic in. I'm a huge electronica fan. I
Sure.
mean, I love, Moby and Massive Attack and all those cats. They're
Yeah.
just they're wonderful. But there's a lot of those elements that are becoming a part of jazz. And even Miles towards the end, he
Mhm.
evolved to kind of an R&B, kind of a
Mhm.
groovier 70s sound that jazz was doing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Have
So,
you heard, and I don't know if we're short on time, but I want to make a
yeah,
song recommendation. You might really dig it. Have you heard Symptom of Life by Willow?
I'll write it down.
So this is Willow Smith. It's Will Smith's
Yeah,
daughter.
I've heard about her. Yeah,
Yeah, and she did a Tiny Desk concert. Symptom of Life is in like 3/7 time
yeah.
or something with really wild chord changes. It is a like a jazz triumph of a pop song.
Okay.
And for it to come from like a Gen Z girl who could be phoning it in with just whatever pop music might sell, but instead does this very alternative avant-garde jazz thing, the song is cool. Like
Yeah.
very cool timing. The drumming is insane.
Those kids are talented that he's got, both of them. I mean,
Yeah.
that Smith gene pool is keeping it on. They're trucking for sure.
Yeah, they've got some work ethic in the family for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So, speaking of work ethic, throughout your career and all the different
yeah.
incarnations and everything that has evolved into you today, what are you the proudest of?
Hmm. This is a funny question because and I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but like, and my friends and my family get on me about this, but every time I have a success, I can't I can't give myself a pat on the back. I can't feel good about it. I instantly want to move to the whatever the next thing is and the to do. So I am not good at kind of taking a beat to go, oh wow, like I graduated from grad school, or oh wow, my site launched, or oh wow, we got a new contract with a new school. Like I can never allow myself. I always feel like if I take a moment to congratulate myself, that I've somehow taken my eye off the ball, and that it's dangerous to do it. Probably something to bring up maybe with a therapist rather than on a podcast. But I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all? Do you have like a little
Totally.
bit of that gene?
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
moving on. Like I
Yeah.
love what's happened, but I tend to be that kind where there's just things that I want to do, and there's
Yeah.
just yeah, I dig it totally. Well, so
Yeah.
let's get to the jugular. Maybe this next question is more applicable. At
Sure.
the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Mm. Um, oof. So I think certainly like in a business context, I like to think of myself as bilingual, in the sense that there are many people who understand the world of education, specifically independent school education. That's the world I come from, and can speak to you about pedagogy, cognitive science. They have lots of years in classrooms and in leadership. They know that world. And then there are plenty of people who know the tech side, right? And they can talk about like how an LLM is like constructed, right? Or like sort of what kind of ed tech intervention research you should be looking at and making a purchasing decision. Like they know that world too. So I really like to see myself as a bridge between two stakeholder groups that typically don't do a good job of communicating. And I like the idea of bringing advanced tech to people who otherwise wouldn't get it. So this is again is that staff side of schools. Automation's happening in Fortune 500 companies all over the place. They're running wild with automating workflows. No one's doing it for schools, because to do it for schools, you have to understand something about how schools operate. They are in many ways not traditional businesses. They have whole departments that look nothing like what you'd find at some other kind of company. They're using third-party applications, student information systems, learning management systems. That stuff doesn't exist in other kinds of companies. So you really need someone at the nexus of multiple points to be a translator, to be bilingual, and to make stuff happen. So I like that idea of being in the center of that Venn diagram.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one musical concert,
Mm.
where are you going?
It's hard to say. It's hard not to say something like to go see Michael Jackson in his prime or to go see Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder would be great. To
Yeah,
go see Stevie Wonder, I don't know what the best year for that would be. Something like 1970, early 70s maybe.
yeah,
Stevie. I really, really love Stevie Wonder and like his impact on pop music and what he did for sort of bringing jazz into pop music specifically. I'm not just saying that because I'm on here. Like I really do think I would love to go see Stevie in his prime, and Michael Jackson just like peak king of pop, off the wall Mike would be pretty entertaining as a show. I don't know that we've ever hit that. I mean, you could look at like Taylor Swift and look at like the numbers of her sales and her streams and whatever, and it's a kind of an apples to oranges thing. But in terms of like pure pop icon, I think you kind of get into like Elvis, Michael Jackson territory, and then can't say that that's ever really been topped because the landscape is now so fragmented,
yeah,
and everyone's off in their own little world. Those are artists where literally every single person in the world is listening to them. And so
yeah,
you're experiencing a kind of cultural phenomenon with like the Beatles or something that you just couldn't replicate today.
yeah.
Um, what's your answer? What do you think?
Well, when I was a kid, my dad was a car salesman, and they used to have all these drawings, and they'd win trips.
Mm,
My dad won tickets to see Michael Jackson with the Jackson Five. I went to Arrowhead Stadium and saw that rhinestone glove in '85 come up out of the ground with the brightest light in the world shining on it. Girls
yeah,
fainting. It was like
yeah,
Beatlemania, and it was just like crazy. But I will tell you on the Stevie Wonder tip off, there was
yeah.
a young jazz cat by the name of um, uh, what the name? No, Matthew Whitaker.
Okay.
He's blind, and he came to town, and I'd interviewed him like
Hmm.
years ago before the pandemic started. And I didn't realize how big he was. And 2 weeks later, he's on 60 Minutes. I'm like, wait, that was the guy that I just interviewed. He
Okay.
is he's brilliant. He's beyond brilliant. He's
Yeah.
another kind. He had a Hammond B3 behind him. He had a piano in front of him. He was clapping. He was yelling into the crowd. I thought I was watching an incarnation of Stevie Wonder. There was
Whoa.
a And the beautiful thing about him is not only is the music phenomenal, his spirit is
Mm,
indomitable. He has this shield around happiness and
hmm.
sunshine and just good, pure being alive on this planet in a way that nothing's going to penetrate.
Yeah.
That's what's so spectacular. But his music, man, and he gets funky. He gets into like different grooves. Like his
Hmm.
latest album is a little bit more funkier than the others. So you should check him out. But he was definitely Stevie Wonder incarnate. I was blown away.
Another artist, because the happiness thing, I agree with you. There is something about artists that just ooze positivity, and
Yeah.
not in a kind of saccharine manufactured way, but it's in everything they write. And I've always kind of felt this when I was working in music, that's I always felt like there's certain artists where I've never met them in person, but listening to their music, I know for a fact I'd get along with them,
Yeah.
because I always just think there's no way a jerk could write that song. I
Right.
refuse to believe it. It's
Hmm.
too happy. There's too much joy in the music.
Yeah.
I refuse to believe that a jerk wrote it. Like
Yeah.
it couldn't be created by a jerk.
Yeah.
And someone kind of like that. Have you heard of a guy named Gareth Donkin?
Yeah.
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 Dude, Gareth Donkin, I mean, he wears his influences on his sleeve pretty heavily, but in terms of like reincarnation of that kind of Michael Jackson Stevie thing, Gareth Donkin is like killing it. And he's
Yeah.
got perfect pitch.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something to artists who sing, produce, play on their own tracks, because you get this really singular vision.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens in music is you get too many chefs in the kitchen. You
Yeah.
look at these tracks and they've got a million credits, and you can just tell it got watered down somewhere along the way. It lost itself.
Yeah.
Versus someone like a Mac Miller or somebody who's like involved at every step and really
Yeah.
kept the vision aligned the whole way through. Makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
So before we get out of the door, if anyone wants to reach out, find out more about you, any of the good
Sure.
business, where do they go?
Yeah, so Evan Harris, pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I've got a website called pathosgroup.ai, pathosgroup.ai. And yeah, I would just say, like, if you think that you have a loved one who's attending a school that's overwhelmed, and spoiler alert, that's all of them,
Yeah.
we can help. And we do like these small pilot projects just to kind of show the school some value early. It's not a big commitment for them to kind of test us out. But yeah, that's my passion right now is helping these schools to automate some of this, what we call lovingly, drudgery.
It's necessary. Evan, this has
Yeah.
been wonderful, man. Thank you so much. You're
Yeah.
the cool cat. Best of
Yeah.
luck with
Thanks, man. This
everything.
was great. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for having me.
Yes, sir.